I think that sums it up pretty well. Thanks a lot for the introduction, John. So just to add a few more things, I'm a psychiatrist with a PhD in brain imaging and computer science. So I like to say that computer science is my second passion after psychiatry and medicine. Today I'm going to be talking about the project that really started as a small summer initiative in which I wanted to test out an old idea of mine which I came up with during my student years. And we didn't really have an ambition to make it a huge study, but the more we started digging into it, it was a bold hypothesis that we wanted to test, that the more we started digging into it, the more interesting it started to become. From the very beginning, I want to encourage all of you to be critical about everything that I'm going to say, question the data, question the integrity of the analysis, question the conclusions that we are making, because I think that's the only good way for the science to move forward, to engage in respectful and scientific discussions. So with these words, I think I can start. So we know that global events impact the way we behave, the way we think, and of course the way our brains function. Thus, it has been shown that geographic proximity to 9/11 terrorist attack site is related to amygdala activation during memory recollection task. So perhaps what is more relevant to the present situation that we're all in, it has been shown that volumetric increases in the affective brain happen directly following the COVID-19 lockdown. But in the study that I'm going to talk about, we wanted to really take a broader look at this. And we were looking for the indicators that would allow us to track the global processes in the society on day-to-day basis. And fortunately, there is such an indicator that has been used in a number of previous studies. It's the stock market. And it's not the only alternative to track global events in the time scale. So you can also look into other aspects like annual mortality rates, unemployment rates, and so on. But one advantage of the stock market is that it's really fast. It has a really good time resolution. And if you think about it, I think you would agree with me that it's a good indicator of fast changes in the society. Because if you think about it that way, so whenever a government wants to implement a certain reform or engages in a new collaboration and a new global collaboration, it still takes time for the global economical changes to occur. So for the employment rates to change, the new businesses to be established, but the markets, they react immediately. And from previous studies, we know pretty well that whenever the market crashes, we see global changes occurring. The taxes raise, the unemployment rates go high, and other global processes that I'm going to be talking about in a minute also change. So we know that the stock market behavior correlates with population well-being, anxiety levels in the population, rates of self-harm and suicide, and even number of fatal car accidents. However, we know very little about causal links and the underlying mechanisms. So that was, to a very large extent, the focus of the study that I'm presenting. So we wanted to see whether there is a relationship between the stock market oscillations and oscillations in the structural brain patterns. It is important to keep in mind that there is a number of assumptions in the study that we did. First, perhaps the most important one, which we also addressed, we cannot, with 100% certainty, rule out that the correlations that we observe are not driven by the fact that whenever stock market goes down, certain types of people show up for the investigations, with certain personality types, with certain brains, and so on. but we did address that in a replication cohort that I'm also going to present. So this is the setting for the study. We prepared an application, we submitted an application to the UK by a bank. It's, as John said, it's a huge brain imaging database. Importantly, this is not only the brain imaging database. So the sample that we came up with targets about 500,000 UK citizens. For them, we had different measures of their well-being, their emotional states, but there was also a subpopulation of those with MRI scans, about 40,000. So that was the main target sample. So here you see the comparison of these two samples. So the mood sample spans approximately 14 years. And as I said before, it's about 500,000. Important to keep in mind, some of the subjects were evaluated twice, and we also addressed that in the linear mixed effects modeling, just the fact that some of the subjects had multiple assessments. That was also the case for the mood data, and both for the mood data and for the brain data. So they are comparable. That said, brain sample was a little bit older than the mood sample, but across other characteristics, they were pretty much comparable. So we pre-registered the study on Open Science Foundation. So these are the main variables. So the main investigated market variable was FTSE 100. That's the indicator of the 100 top performing companies in the United Kingdom. It has been shown previously that it's a decent measure of the UK economical performance. We accessed it via Yahoo Finance. And we also pre-registered a number of regions that we know are part of the affective circuit. So we relied on the previous meta-analysis. So to list them explicitly, it's the components of the anterior cingulate region, subgenual cingulate region, insula, amygdala, and the nucleus accumbens, and lateral orbitofrontal cortex. So here you see the general time frame. So this is the FTSE stock market behavior over the time that we've investigated it. You see that there is a slight upward trend, but we also reran the analysis after the trending of this data, and it didn't change the result almost at all. So this is the real data. This is the FTSE 100 fluctuations over 14 years period. So these are the unemployment rates in the UK during that period. And you see that whenever market goes down, the unemployment rates go up. So this is a completely independent data from the UK official UK governmental website. This is the mood data. So this is the negative emotions measures. We also had measures of positive emotions and a number of other non-MRI measures, but we just started from a sanity check whether we can see the relationship between the stock market behavior and the negative mood and the mood data in general. And indeed, that's what we saw. So you see these are the cross correlations. So we see that FTSE 100 correlated negatively with unemployment rates quite strongly, right? So whenever market goes down, unemployment rates go up. And a similar pattern is observed for the negative emotions. So whenever market goes down, negative emotions go up. So these are, again, the results of our sanity check. So we see that stock market correlates positively with positive emotions and negatively with negative emotions. But interestingly, we also see similar relationships with the blood pressure and alcohol intake. So whenever market goes down, the blood pressure goes up. Whenever market goes down, people start taking alcohol more. Again, I mentioned the assumptions of the study, but we also replicated this effect in a single subject study. So this is the MyConnectome data. Some of you may know that as an 18-month study in which Russ Poldrack scanned himself for 18 months, and we see the same pattern in a single subject study that spans 1.5 years. So this is the anxiety during scan. This is the Dow Jones. He's working in the United States. Same result for blood pressure and for alcohol intake. So as I said before, the main target sample was the MRI one, and this is the period for which we had MRI scans available. And now you're gonna see the main results essentially. So this is the real data tracking associations between FTSE 100 index and amygdala volume over this 5.5 years period. So these are the correlations, the raw correlations, the daily correlations, and the monthly correlations. So just to explain it explicitly, this is the sort of the single subject effects over the entire sample. So this is the data averaged over days, and that's where you perhaps start seeing a more population-like pattern. So this is the more relationship at the population level instead of the individuals. And again, it is important to keep in mind that even though at the individual levels the effects may be small, it doesn't mean that they're not important. And I showed you previously that there is a clear relationship between rates of suicide, self-harm, fatal car accidents. So the effects, despite perhaps being small at the individual level, which we know is not necessarily the case in a previous single subject replication study where we demonstrated this effect at the single subject level. But again, it doesn't mean that if the effect is small, it's not important. It's clearly not the case. I like to put it in more simpler words. So say whenever market goes down, it probably doesn't mean that any of us would commit suicide, but at the population level, the suicide rates will skyrocket. So we demonstrated that the maximum correlation occurs during the period of maximum during and directly after the periods of maximum market volatility and variance. So whenever there is a substantial change in the stock market behavior, whenever it ends and then the period of relative stability occurs, this correlation is the strongest. And very little happens when the market is stable for a relatively long time. So it again strengthens our argumentations that the maximum association is observed during the phase transition events. So as some of you know, we have pre-printed the study and received a series of, how shall I put it, highly scientific comments. This is one of them, and there are more following that. And you don't need to read all of them because a colleague of mine summarizes the quality of these comments pretty decently, I think. So that's sort of the overall overview of the quality of the criticism that we have received. But I have to say that I took this one particularly personal because as a Russian, I always assume that I'm pretty good at dealing with large amounts without getting drunk. So go home, cognitive neuroscience, you sloppy drunk on large sample sizes. So we wanted to replicate this result again in other studies. So we looked into a very different study from a very different population. It's a clinical sample, the PPMI study. The participants are incentivized very differently. It's a clinical study, as I said, targeting Parkinson's patients and also healthy controls, different age population. And again, you see this pattern that whenever Dow Jones goes down, the amygdala volume goes up. But then we thought, well, why don't we do the same in a single subject study? So, and that's what we saw again. So the My Connectome data set didn't have publicly available structural data, so we took inverse variants of amygdala both signal as a proxy measure, and again, we saw this effect quite consistently, which is also in line with the non-MRI measures. So I thought that, I said already that, many of the comments don't really worth the attention, but there was one comment that I actually thought was good. It's a comment by Tao Yorkoni. A useful thought experiment is to ask yourself if you would feel differently about this paper if the putative investigated variable had been, say, daily mood rather than stock market index. If the answer is yes, you should maybe worry that your priors are doing more heavy weightlifting than they should. So I just invite you to conduct this thought experiment and think about the conclusions. Anyhow, these are the results for the pre-registered brain regions. And we see that some of the regions are positively related to the stock market oscillation. Some of them are negatively. And the strongest association was observed, as I mentioned, as I showed previously, for the amygdala volumes and for the nucleus accumbens. So we see that the stock market oscillations are related to oscillations in the affective brain. That's the main take-home message. Interestingly, one of the regions, it's the lateral frontal cortex, in the follow-up analysis, has been shown to be related to the overall income. And we saw that people with a very low income and an extremely high income are particularly sensitive, or better to say, their lateral orbitofrontal cortex is particularly sensitive to the stock market fluctuations. We have also conducted a number of follow-up analyses looking into different frequency bands. And first thing we saw is that the effects are mostly driven by the low frequency band. That's also in line with the fact that we see the maximum correlations during phase transition events, when the maximum change in the global societal dynamics occurs. But importantly, there were also some associations in the high frequency bands that were consistent. This slide is also important. So we also pre-registered the reference index. So it was the Chinese index, and we pre-registered it as the one being distant, one of the most distant economy from the United Kingdom. And indeed, we saw that the further away you are in the economically and socio-demographically, the weaker this association is. And for some more distant markets, it reverses. So you see, this is the FTSE 100 correlation with other stock market indexes over the studied period. And you see that the further away you are, the weaker this association is. These are the main results. Sorry, I'm going to present a number of ugly looking tables, but I thought it's important to show them to sort of illustrate the principle and everything we have done explicitly. So these are the main results, and we have also tried to correct for other non-UK stock markets. So this is the PCA. So we extracted the first 5 principal components from the stock markets of the 15 top UK trading partners, and the effects were still there. This is the correlation plot. So these are just the regular Pearson R's. And you see that if you shift the stock market data forward in time, you see that this correlation goes down, 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 and ultimately becomes non-significant. But interestingly, if you shift it backwards, you see that that's where the correlation actually is peaking. So these are the regions that were correlated positively. These are the regions that were correlated negatively. And that we took as an initial indication of that it is important for the subsequent causality analysis that we've implemented. I'm going to briefly talk about it. But interestingly enough, if you shift it more, then you see it first going down and then reversing. And everyone who has done time series analysis knows that this is an indication of autocorrelation in time series. So that means that the pattern, there is a repetition, there is a memory in the time series, that the pattern seems to repeat itself over time. Sometimes it reverses, but it is important that what you have on a given timeline may correlate with what you observed few steps before. So this is important for other analyses that we are doing. So this is approximately where the reverse occurs. But fortunately, there are nice ways to address the autocorrelation, which is commonly present in global time series. Importantly, if you shuffle the dates, you don't observe these effects. So they are gone completely. So now we are shifting the timeline to this event when this reversal pattern occurs. And you see that indeed some of these associations remain significant. And you can actually reproduce these effects with noise with pink noise simulation, with 1F with scale-free noise simulation. But importantly, this 1F noise simulation related effects are gone if you correct for the other stock markets, unlike the main result. I'm going to be talking about the noise in a bit. It also depends, how you interpret the result depends on how you treat the noise or the source of the noise. But before I do that, I want to show you a number of noise simulation experiments that we've conducted. So this is the uniform and Gaussian noise, and this is the chance of receiving false positives on the empirical null assumptions. So these are the effect sizes that we have in our sample for the 12 regions that we pre-registered and that turned out to be significant. And you see that with the regular unstructured noise, uncolored noise, so-called, you are very unlikely to receive the effect sizes of this magnitude. However, with scale-free noise that is commonly present in a number of systems that I'm going to talk about in a moment, you see that the chance of observing these effects is also going up. And here you see the autocorrelation function plots. So this is the time lag, and this is the magnitude of autocorrelation. So the black is the market data, and these are the different types of noise. So this is the red noise, this is the pink noise, but I mean, overall, it depends a little bit of how you initialize the noise. So overall, you see that for the time series that you simulate as having scale-free properties, meaning that there are repeating patterns in them, you see that the stock market behavior exhibits a similar property of the one that you typically see in scale-free noise. So this effect is seen for the daily data, and here you see that for the monthly data, and you see that it actually follows the pattern of the scale-free noise. Not perfectly, but it can be approximated with that. Interestingly, this type of noise is present in many complex systems in nature, in the brain, in the patterns of earthquakes, in the sounds and behavior of oceans, of the sea, in the global dynamics of bacteria colonies and many other naturally occurring systems in nature. So here you're about to listen to how the 1F noise sounds. So this is the sound of the sea waves. I really miss that sound. This is the sound of windstorm, another example of scale-free noise in nature. So, and now you're about to listen to the sound of the FTSE 100. So this is 410 hertz amplified, so you could hear it. That's how it sounds. I'm going to abstain from any direct interpretations. I just thought it's fun to listen to it. So it's very easy to convert this kind of time series in the sound wave. But I think it's interesting how similar it is to some of the naturally occurring noises in nature. We also looked into distances of the UK with other stock markets, and you see that the magnitude of the brain stock market link correlates with the distance from of the other stock markets from the UK. So the larger the distance, or stronger the tie. So this is actually the data from again from the world stop experts for the United Kingdom. So the stronger the tie of the UK with a particular stock market index, the stronger the brain market link. So again, we do the same thing, estimating the median correlation between the brain data with the investigated regions and the corresponding stock market, excluding UK, because of course for the UK it's the strongest. And you see that the stronger the tie is, the stronger the correlation is. So the economical ties in this case is defined on the percentage of exports, and you see that consistently for the daily average scale and for the monthly average scale. There is also another completely unrelated study that looked into cultural distances of the UK from other countries. And they also defined it actually quite elegantly. So they looked into preferences in the people existing in people from different countries towards particular music types. So that they had a decent sample to relate that, and you see that the larger the distance of a particular country, the weaker the brain market link. So again, it was pretty consistent. Now I am about to embark on arguably a more dangerous part of my presentation. It concerns the causality analysis. So here we wanted to tease out a particular link, which causal direction is more likely, whether it's the market impacts brain or the brain impacts market. Before I do that, I want to say that there is a series of previous works that have encouraged me, that I would say inspired me to run this sort of analysis. And perhaps one of the most important of them is the concept of social mood introduced by an economist, by two people predominantly. One is the economist and another one is mathematician. The concept of social mood as a shared mental state among humans that arise from social interaction. And I want to say that it's not a bogus concept. So there are publications, peer-reviewed publications, and existing in economics, and there is a growing field of socionomics that is currently trying to investigate how social mood is impacting the economy. And one of their ideas that they are putting forward is the idea of stock market as a metric stick of the social mood. And I won't go deep into the details of this concept, but that's the most important one I've already mentioned, that the stock market is considered as a metric stick for the social mood, which is an inherently latent variable that is impossible to measure directly. So this is a book that I can refer you, those of you who are interested in knowing more, this is a brilliantly written book that also comes in handy in the present times. But to cut the long story short, in a series of analyses, this group of authors demonstrate an interesting set of relationships between the stock market behavior and some trends in fashion, in buildings of skyscrapers, and many other aspects, including mortality and birth rates. Again, I won't spend much time with that. There are different ways to infer temporal causality, but one perhaps of the most commonly used ones is the Granger causality analysis, which essentially looks into the originally two time series and tries to infer which one comes first, where is, to put it simply, where the chicken is and where the egg is. It relies on a number of important assumptions, which are always important to keep in mind prior to running this analysis. First, and the most important one, is that Granger causality assumes stationarity, which practically means that means of the time series of the data and the variances do not change over time. And this is a highly important assumption in our case, because we know that markets are anything but stationary. So we know that the variances and the means, this is the real data of the FTSE, they change every time. And if you look at different time scales, there are different phase transition events. So the stock markets are non-stationary. Fortunately, there is an extension of the Toda-Yamamoto, of the Granger causality analysis, the so-called Toda-Yamamoto procedure. Again, won't spend much time going through all of the steps, but it is specifically designed for the situations of the non-stationarity in the time series and the presence of residual zero correlation, like in our situation. In a nutshell, it relies on a number of steps. First, you determine the time, the lag length that minimizes the autocorrelations in the time series. Then you specify the enhanced vector autoregression model by adding the maximum order of integration to the number of flags, and then you carry out a set of statistical tests to determine which of the direction, which of the hypotheses is more likely than the other. So these are the results. And again, we see that the hypothesis market impacts population brain is substantially more likely virtually for the vast majority of the variables. I mean, sometimes the alternative hypothesis also receives some support, but when it comes to the consistency, overall it receives more support as compared to the opposite one. To sum up, stock market dynamics have been shown to exhibit scale-free properties and can be used as a useful tool for tracking large-scale societal processes. Stock market oscillations are related to emotional states and the affective brain circuits of the UK population, and also, as we saw in a number of validation and replication analyses in the United States population. While small on an individual level, the magnitude of this relationship increases over larger time scales when we start looking into the population-specific dynamics. And certain subpopulations like low and very high income individuals may be particularly sensitive or susceptible to these effects. And finally, market impacts population brain causal link is more supported by the data than the opposite one. And I want to end this presentation by thanking those without whom this study will probably never occur. I think that's all I wanted to say, so I'm happy to answer your questions. So this is perhaps the last set of words that I want to have. Don't raise your voice, improve your argument. Thank you very much to all of you for your attention.